Greetings from the StarCraft 2 Community Balance Council. First off, we would like to thank everyone for providing feedback on and testing the previously proposed changes. We would also like to reassure that the balance updates are a joint effort from the entire community, and your feedback is very important for the direction the Balance Council is heading. Upon analyzing the perception of the first iteration of this balance patch and the games played on the PTR server, we would like to make the following adjustments for further testing. Starting with a developer comment on the battery overcharge removal. After receiving playtesting feedback, we see that many players have enjoyed the flexibility provided by the new ability, and we would like to continue testing this proposed change. However, there has also been a strong concern about Protoss' defense in the early game after losing the battery overcharge ability, specifically against Terran rushes. We will be testing the following changes to try and improve Protoss' ability to defend in these scenarios. I also saw that there was a strong concern about Protoss' defense in the early game. I also had a strong concern about Protoss' defense in the early game, but then I played a crap ton of games against mainly Clem in the past 7 days, and I compared them with some of my older games that I played against Clem pre-patch, and I actually noticed that in way more games, post-patch, with the energy recharge, I managed to get out of the early game with a lead, or at least still alive. My win rate went up as a result of that, just because my position in the early stages of the mid game tended to be way better than it was before the patch. I actually believe that there are very little scenarios in which battery overcharge is better than energy overcharge. Very often against Terran players, you end up fighting away from a battery. Terran's army consists of range units, and thus, if they're not aggressively stim pushing without medevacs into your battery, energy overcharge actually feels better. There's just 1 or 2 scenarios in which I prefer battery overcharge, and the majority of the scenarios with standard games, I actually much prefer energy overcharge. It also allows for many more different build orders. Your scouting is much better. Even the standard builds, like a mine drop, for example, is easier to deal with because you have hallucination scouting, so you can see where it comes from, which makes blink build orders much easier to execute for someone like me, who is maybe not as fast at, spotting when the medevac flies into your main base and insta-blinking. So I think the people that I was talking to also agreed and felt that the TOS early game was much stronger than it was before the patch, at least at the highest level. So I'm surprised that that this is in there and that we're doing more changes, but let's just read the first change. Cyclone changes have been reverted. So currently in the live game, cyclones can be built from a factory with a reactor. They have relatively low range. They're not super fast, but they're pretty punchy. They're going to be reverted back to the old Cyclone with the longer range, the higher speed, and where you have to build a tech lab. When I read this change, I really thought that Terran was going to have very little build orders and that it was maybe even going to be an issue for Terran because they wouldn't be capable of being aggressive anymore. I just played a bunch of games and I actually felt more frustrated against this Cyclone than I felt against the Cyclone in its current state. Against the Cyclone in the current state, I can kite with Stalkers. If I have 2 Stalkers against 1 Cyclone, I can win that fight. The Tech Lab Cyclone, I can't do that. I need to have a battery, I need to have more units, I need to wait until I have Blink until I can do something. It also feels much harder to kite armies coming across the map, which is a very big part in PvT. I actually didn't win a single game today. All of my early games were god-awful when I played it against this Cyclone. I think a reason is because it is kind of a new unit. I don't recall exactly how the micro is supposed to be, but boy does this unit feel frustrating to play against. I generally hate units with very long range, and this Cyclone gets up to 15 range with a lock-on and a higher speed than the Stalker. So I honestly got very frustrated playing against it, and I didn't enjoy it as much. So I'm not a huge fan of this change. I think this is actually a change that is probably going to help lower level players quite a bit because the Cyclone is hard to control. He's very squishy as well. It is more expensive, but if the goal is for higher level play, I don't know. I feel less free against this Cyclone than I did against the previous Cyclone that you could reactor. So I'm not a fan of this change because I don't know. I struggled with it, but this could just be, like I said, because I don't have enough experience against it anymore. It's been a while since I knew how to micro against it. It felt freaking frustrating. I did not enjoy it. Then going over to the Stalker train time on the gateway, which has been reduced from 30 seconds to 27 seconds. The Stalker build time change is added to help address builds such as Proxy 2 Barracks Marauder, which were very difficult to defend even with the battery overcharge ability. I think against Proxy 2 Barracks Marauder, the problem never was the Stalker build time. The problem is that you're being outproduced on base units. So if you open up with a 1-gate expand and someone plays Proxy Marauder against you, they have 2 barracks that are producing Marauders. Once your battery doesn't out-heal the Marauders anymore at 5 Marauders, you're just going to get completely blasted because they have more units. So you need to quickly tech. The way that I always used to defend Proxy 2 Rex Marauder was by building just 2 Stalkers, getting a bunch of batteries, and then trying to tech into a Void Ray as fast as possible, even skipping Warp Gate. I think mass-producing Stalkers is not actually the correct answer. So I don't think this is a good way to deal with Proxy 2 Barracks Marauder. I think the correct way post-patch, without battery overcharge, is to either go 1-base Robo, or to just do it the same as before. And I think that should probably still be viable. I haven't actually tested that a whole lot. I, however, still like the changes, despite the reasoning, I think, being wrong. I think the change is cool. Having the Stalker out a little bit faster helps a crap ton against Proxy Reaper, and that's a build that I don't really enjoy playing against. I played some games against Clem this morning, and the Proxy Reaper felt much, much weaker. Maybe too much even, where it might not be a viable build order anymore. But I think if Terran still has as many builds as before the patch, I'm not sure how big of an issue that really is. I'm also kind of happy with this because it might allow Protoss players to do something aggressive in the early game like a Proxy Gate, and in combination with the revert of the Cyclone, that could maybe be successful again. So I'm kind of excited to see that type of play come back. I don't think this is going to help very much against Proxy 2 Barracks Marauder, if I'm being honest. Then the late game concerns. Ghost supply increased from 2 to 3. I think this is a good change. This is a change that I've suggested many times over the past months as well. The Ghost does not feel like a 2 supply unit. It feels like a 4 supply unit. Like if you compare it, for example, with a Disruptor, I think against Zerg and against Protoss, you always rather have a single Ghost than a single Disruptor. And you also always rather have 5 Ghosts rather than 5 Disruptors. So in 2 out of the 3 matchups, the Ghost is just simply better than the Disruptor, despite the Disruptor being 4 supply and more expensive as well. And that feels very weird. I still think that is kind of weird, but okay. It is what it is. I was struggling a lot in the late game as well, in the games that I've been playing over the past week and a half. Played a lot of PvTs. The Disruptor I always struggle in the late game, is the reality. I'm not sure if the Disruptor nerf did a whole lot, because I'm not hitting any of my Disruptor shots anyway against the top Terrans. Their micro is just freaking good. But yeah, I think this is a good start to help there, because now it makes it a little bit more viable for Templar late game play, which I think was very difficult to do before this patch. Ghost numbers are always very high. If you need more Ghosts to deal with Templar, you're just going to have a less strong base army, which I think is good. I think this is a good change. I haven't played any games in late game yet because I kept dying against the Neo Cyclone. So I don't really have any special insights on this, to be honest. The next change, the Mothership now can no longer be targeted by Abduct. We have received strong community feedback about this change since the Mothership was made untargetable by Neural Parasite in the past. With the changes back to 400-400, we would like to test this idea to make the Mothership less fragile in the Zerg versus Protoss matchup. And when it says less fragile, I think it pretty much means invincible in maxed armies. The only way that Zerg kills a Mothership is by pulling it out of the Archon Storm Ball, because Zerg doesn't have long-range anti-air. They have Hydras, which have very short range. It's not realistic to go in and snipe. And they have Corruptors, which have very short range, and which is not realistic to snipe a Mothership with either. This basically makes the unit invincible in maxed armies. I think this is a bad change. Because of that, there's no such other unit in the entire game, I think. You can't abduct an Ultra, but the Ultra is always very far at the front and also doesn't get built in ZVZ. I think you can't abduct an Ultra at least. I'm not even sure. But either way, I think this is a bad change. If you believe that PvZ needs to be buffed in the late game, then I think we can find other buffs. I think this is just a bad design change. It's going to be really frustrating for Zerg players to play against. So yeah, I'm just not a fan of it. I also don't believe that Protoss needs to be buffed against Zerg in the late game. I actually think Protoss is very strong against Zerg in the late game currently. So yeah. All right, Ultralisk. Ultralisk Anabolic Synthesis bonus move speed reduced from 0.82 to 0.59. We would like to test a slight reduction in the move speed of Ultralisk, bringing it down to the same move speed as Stimped Marines/Marauders. This is to try and make Terran players feel more comfortable moving out on the map in the late game, as well as balance out increases in strength from the push priority change. This is going to be interesting for ZVT. I don't really know much about ZVT. I did hear some Terrans say that it's hard to move out on the map once Ultras are out, and maybe this movement speed reduce is going to help out the Terrans a little bit, staying on bio, mine, or whatever, now that their Ghost is a bit more supply expensive. So yeah, I'm curious to see how that's going to play out, to be honest, but don't really have a dog in that fight. Then going over to the removed changes, Broodlord changes have been removed. I think this is, quite frankly, a good call. The Broodlord, not because the Broodlord is imbalanced or too strong. If anything, the Broodlord is too weak. But I hate the Broodlord just as a person. I think it's, or as a unit, sorry, and as a person. I just hate it altogether. It is one of the most frustrating units that has created some of the blandest games in the history of games. It's never fun. It never has been fun. And in its current form, it never will be fun. I think what the unit needs is a redesign. It shouldn't be buffed because it produces god-awful games in which a Zerg sits above Spores with Broodlord Infestor, and that's terrible to watch. So I'm glad to see it go, to be honest. It's awful. Then moving to the Tempest change. The Tempest damage point change has been removed. So you still have the supply buff. It's still 4 supply, but the damage point change removed. I think it's fine. The unit felt extremely strong against Zerg already. I haven't really been building it a whole lot against Terran, to be honest. It feels hard to transition into. It's really awkward to transition into air against Terran because Terran is so active on the map most of the time. So yeah, I haven't really seen that quite yet. Up next, Liberator changes removed. I think this is a buff for Terran. I think the new Liberator was worse than the old Liberator. They couldn't easily harass with it. It was harder for them to push forward. It did look a bit silly. I don't really care about it. I think this is a good change to remove because no one was excited for it. Terrans hated it. Lower level Protoss players hated it because it looked huge. I think it was better against Zerg probably. So I don't know. I'm glad it's gone. It didn't feel nice for whatever reason. It just felt wrong. Moving on. Developer comment, we agreed to feedback received that these changes could lead to more drawn-out games, which this patch is trying to move away from, and these changes are no longer being tested. With Ghost being weakened as well, we no longer believe that Broodlord changes are needed to adjust the level of its power. I'll come back to that later. I don't think that's necessarily correct, but we'll see. Other changes. The Hydralisk Dash, name is not finalized, speed bonus increased from 60 to 100. Dash is now point targeted, giving the Hydralisk a move order to the target location. The previously tested functionality was too hard to make use of for many players, so we would like to make this adjustment to try and make the ability more functional and powerful. Honestly, I think even in its current form and in the previous form, so far the changes to the Hydra have felt more like a nerf because they have a move speed reduction on creep. I don't think there's a lot of Zergs that are really excited to have been using the Dash either. It just was too weak. I think it probably should be buffed more if it's a Hive upgrade, because right now it's just extremely underwhelming, and I still think that will remain the case. Moving on to the Lurker. Lurker health reduced from 200 to 190, and the Lurker sight increases from 10 to 11. As we continue to test the Disruptor changes, we would like to reduce the Lurker health to 190, so it will not survive 2 Purification Nova hits. The sight range is also being increased to fix an issue caused by the Lurker having identical attack and sight ranges, leading to its attack range having slight inconsistencies depending on angle. I'm not a fan of this. The goal of the patch was, at least as stated, to make high-level Protoss play better and lower-level Protoss play a little bit worse. No one at high level builds Disruptors against Lurkers. Everyone deals with Lurkers by either building Immortal Storm or by playing Blinkstalker, Templar, and then into Fast Tempest to deal with the Lurker push. These are the currently most common responses. I haven't seen Disruptors as a response to Lurkers in a very long time against Zerg. I don't think we're going to see it either. I also think that with the Broodlord changes being removed, Zerg has a very weak late game against TOS. The Hydra changes didn't quite do what they needed for the Hydra. Now a 10 HP nerf to the Lurker as well. I don't quite understand. And on top of that, the unabductable Mothership. I don't understand how Zerg is ever going to win a fight against a late game TOS army that is maxed out. I honestly just don't see it happen. I'm very curious to see it. The new Immortal nerf, or the Immortal nerf that's in the patch, has definitely helped a bit, but I think Tempest are still strong enough. I think Immortals are also still strong enough. I still need to see a late game army fight that TOS is going to lose in the new patch. I haven't seen it quite yet. So I think Zerg actually needs some love in the late game. I think Zerg is fine in the early game. The Queen nerf and the Spore buff actually worked kind of okay. But in the late game, I think with the Broodlord changes removed, it's going to be very rough balance-wise. More removed changes. Missile turret salvage change has been removed. We agree with the feedback that this change would be counterproductive to making less drawn-out defensive games. We are continuing to test the addition of the salvage ability to the sensor tower, as it should allow for more interesting usage of the sensor tower in accordance with the other proposed sensor tower changes. I think this is good. I don't think it was going to be super impactful, but it also wasn't very necessary. I like that the sensor tower cell or the sensor tower salvage stays. I think that's cool. And you can use it more defensively on lower levels, specifically against things like 3 or 4 gate blink. Blue flame change has been removed. I don't think many people used it and no one seemed very excited for it. The spine crawler changes were removed. I actually don't mind the spine crawler changes being removed, but I dislike the reason. We believe that the spine crawler adjustment is a risky change, as it would lead to proxy hatchery strategies in Zerg versus Protoss being significantly stronger, as well as increasing the strength of 12 pool plus drone rushes in Zerg versus Zerg. Currently, the reason why I don't like this reason is because currently in Zerg versus Protoss, spine rushes are practically non-existent. They are very bad in the current live game. In the PTR, they were better. And as a result, Zerg players started spine rushing me. What did I do? I talked with some other Protoss players. They told me how to beat it. They figured it out within a day and a half. And we had a build order on how to beat the spine crawler rush. StarCraft 2 is a strategy game. I like figuring out strategies. The spine rush was not an unbeatable strategy or way harder to defend than it was for the attacker. No, it was a pretty straightforward response on how to beat it. And I think it's fine for there to be more strategies in the game. I think it's very fun that if you have 2 players and one person doesn't know how to defend something, that they can die against a creative rush like a spine rush. If that is actually the reason why this is being removed because of CVP proxy hatch spine rushes being stronger, I think that's pretty disappointing. If it is because in ZVZ it was impossible to hold, which I can imagine, I don't mind it as much, but in ZVP it felt completely fine. I had no trouble with it. I lost 5 games initially, then I figured out how to beat it, which is how in my mind a strategy game should work. There's a new strategy, you lose to it, you figure out how to beat it. That is StarCraft. I like that part. I don't want that removed because it might be too strong. I don't think it was too strong. We tried it, it was fine. Overall, decent set of changes. I wonder if late game PvT is going to be good for Protoss, or it's going to be better for Protoss now. I think, I'm not sure. Like I said, I haven't played there a whole lot. I hope that I get better against the Cyclone as well, because it's been feeling very frustrating, this new Cyclone. Overall, the changes should be better for TOS, right? I think so. I think Zerg probably needs some love. I hope there's going to be 1 or 2 more iterations of this balance patch. And I hope to see more testing from you guys as well. I think one of the most informative things, I've just been watching my own replays of other high-level players, replays of lower-level players to see how they're using the new abilities and stuff like that. I think it's been really cool to see. One of the least useful things is people saying stuff without actually trying it. Because I think it's really hard to understand what a change actually does most of the time. Like, if you would have asked me a week and a half ago, what did I think of energy overcharge? I would have said that there's probably some use for it, but it is a straight up nerf to the PvT early game. But now after a week and a half, I actually think it's just a buff in the PvT early game. And I think a lot of high-level tossers agree with me on that. So I think it's hard to predict often what happens. Also, same with the Cyclone change. I thought the Cyclone change, like I said, it was going to be much worse for Terran. But now I'm actually kind of annoyed by it and frustrated. And I rage quit. So, yeah. Play the game. Tell me what you think about it. And then I'll see all of you next time. I'll be playing and practicing this, the PTR updates over the next couple of days on my stream as well. So if you want to see that, be sure to tune into my stream, twitch.tv/Harstem, or here on YouTube. I also stream here. And on TikTok, no, just kidding, not on TikTok. All right, love you all equally, except for Goblin, because he's a prick. Right, bye-bye.